Part 1: The Broken Frontier. The Ghosts of the Ilemi Triangle, Unpacking the Colonial Fractures of Ateker Land. For over a century, if you stood at the northernmost tips of Kenya, your eyes would meet a horizon defined by a paradox. This is the home of the Ateker, a vibrant, culturally seamless supercluster of pastoralist communities sharing a single linguistic root but devotion to livestock and a matching worldview. The Turkana of Kenya, the Karamojong of Uganda, the Toposa of South Sudan, and the Nyangatom and Dasenek of Ethiopia do not need translators to speak to one another. They are, by all accounts of ancestry, one family. Yet, if you look down at the dirt beneath their feet, that family is violently fractured. The imperial scramble and the pastoralist trap. When the colonial cartographers sat in comfortable rooms in London and Addis Ababa, they drew straight lines across the East African wilderness with reckless abandon. They carved up the Ateker pasturelands, creating arbitrary national borders that the local communities never recognized. Because successive independent national capitals in Nairobi, Kampala, Juba, and Addis Ababa historically treated these far-flung borderlands as lawless buffer zones or empty wastelands, they invested nothing in them. Left in a developmental vacuum, the Ateker relationship degraded into a tragic cycle known as the pastoralist trap. For decades, the primary cross-border interaction between these cousins was defined by heavily armed cattle rustling, retaliatory massacres, and fierce small arms proliferation. Without roads, markets, or state security, the AK-47 became the sole currency of survival. The geopolitical roadblocks. This historical neglect left behind deep scars that still paralyze regional development. The most glaring example is the infamous Ilemi Triangle, a massive, unresolved colonial-era territorial dispute between Kenya and South Sudan. Because neither Nairobi nor Juba can agree on where the official international border lies, an 11-kilometer stretch of road at the Nadipol-Nakadok frontier has remained frozen in time. The ongoing armed clashes between the Toposa and the Turkana turned this gateway into a dangerous no-go zone, stalling multi-billion-shilling transport corridors. Further east, along the shores of Lake Turkana, sits Todonyang. Here, the relationship is complicated by environmental politics. As Ethiopia constructed massive upstream hydropower dams like Jibe 3 on the Omo River, the natural flooding cycles of the Omo Delta shrunk. Forced to compete for dwindling, fertile mudbanks, the Kenyan Turkana and the Ethiopian Dasenek were locked in bloody, localized resource wars. The Diesel Island. Compounding this isolation was an energy tragedy. While Ethiopia constructed a massive, high-voltage 500 kV electricity highway to export power to Kenya, the lines bypassed Turkana entirely, dropping down through the flat plains of Marsabit County to supply Nairobi. While Marsabit's border town of Moyel flourished with direct cross-border electricity imports from the Ethiopian electric utility, major urban centers in Turkana like Lodwar were left stranded as diesel islands. They were forced to rely on isolated, expensive, and unreliable generators burning trapped in fuel. The message from the national capitals was clear: you are the past. You are a barrier. But infrastructure has a funny way of rewriting history. The tarmac has arrived, the grids are connecting, and Turkana is about to realize that it cannot live in the past forever. The frontier is breaking, and the crossroads are open.
Part 2: The Crossroads of Opportunity. Tarmac over dirt, the mega-projects redefining Turkana's economic geography. For decades, the journey from Kenya's agricultural heartland in Kitale to the desert capital of Lodwar was less of a road trip and more of an endurance test. Truck drivers spoke of the northern route with dread, the punishing, bone-jarring landscape of dirt tracks, deep sand, and seasonal riverbeds, lag gas, that could trap a vehicle for days. Turkana was physically cut off from the rest of Kenya by a wall of terrible infrastructure. But if you drive that route today, the landscape tells a completely different story. The old excuse of isolation is officially dead. A massive wave of multi-billion-shilling infrastructure investments has broken the geographical blockade, transforming Turkana from a remote, dead-end border region into a high-speed transit gateway. The paved spine of the north. The undisputed crown jewel of this transformation is the completion of the fully tarmacked A1 highway. Stretching over 500 kilometers from Kitale through Lodwar and all the way to the border hub of Lokichogio, this modern tarmac artery has fundamentally altered local logistics. What used to be a grueling, multi-day off-road nightmare plagued by highway bandits is now a fast, secure commercial corridor. Travel times have plummeted, vehicle maintenance costs have dropped, and cargo can now move from the port of Mombasa to the northernmost tips of Turkana in a matter of days. The A1 is no longer just a road, it is the economic spine of the entire region. The death of that diesel island. While transport was being revolutionized on land, an equally powerful revolution was taking place on the electrical grid. Historically, Turkana was an energy paradox. Just across the county line in Marsabit sat Africa's largest wind farm, and deep in southern Turkana sat the massive Turkwel hydroelectric power station. Yet, local households and businesses saw none of it. Lodwar was left stranded as an expensive diesel island, relying on isolated generators burning trapped in fuel that frequently broke down. That era is over. With heavy backing from the national government and the World Bank, the Turkwel-Lodwar 106 megawatt grid connection is live. By piping clean, reliable hydropower directly into a brand new substation in Lodwar, Kenya Power has begun permanently shutting down the old diesel generators. For the remote villages too far from the main lines, the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project (KOSAP) has turned Turkana into the national leader in renewable energy, deploying 15 active solar mini-grids across the county. Turkana has gone from energy poverty to an absolute clean power surplus. Unlocking the gateways. With a paved highway and cheap electricity secured, the next major milestone has been the physical opening of new cross-border trade gateways. The Uganda bypass, Lokiriama, rather than descending hundreds of kilometers south to enter Uganda through Malaba or Bisha, Kenya has rehabilitated the Lodwar Lokiriama road. This gives Turkana a direct, peaceful connection into Moroto in northeastern Uganda, creating an alternative trade route that bypasses dangerous traditional conflict zones. The Ethiopia breakthrough, Tadoniang, at the extreme northeastern tip of the county, the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, has requested 50 acres of land to build a formal one-stop border post, OSBP, at Tadoniang. Paired with a newly active simplified trade border regime, the STBR, this framework eliminates complex paperwork, allowing local traders to legally and seamlessly move goods across the Ethiopian border without crippling tariffs. A realistic perspective as the twin giants of the north. As we look at these milestones, the sharp economic reality check is necessary. When it comes to macro-level trade with Ethiopia, Marsabit County and the Moyale OSBP will always take the lion's share of the business. The A2 highway through Marsabit is flat, direct, and connects Nairobi straight to Addis Ababa. It is the designated highway for heavy industrial trade between the two capitals. But Turkana doesn't need to compete with Marsabit over Ethiopia to become wealthy. In fact, looking at Ethiopia as the main prize misses the bigger picture. Ethiopia is a highly specialized, localized bonus for Turkana. Turkana's true geopolitical superpower lies in a different direction. It is the only region uniquely positioned to act as a multi-directional tri-state triangle, anchoring the flow of goods between Uganda, South Sudan, and Kenya. By leveraging its superior new infrastructure, Turkana is poised to become the ultimate clearinghouse for the East African frontier.
Part 3: The Next Frontier. Beyond the pastoralist trap, Turkana's blueprint to become East Africa's trans-shipment hub. The tarmac is dry. The power lines are buzzing with 106 megawatts of clean hydro energy from Turkwel. The border posts have been drawn up on government blueprints. For decades, leaders in the North Rift could blame their challenges on state marginalization, lack of roads, and energy poverty. Today, those excuses are officially obsolete. The infrastructure is here. The single biggest question facing Turkana County now is, what is the next step? If Turkana leaves this multi-billion shilling infrastructure to sit idle, it will remain a transit corridor where wealth merely passes through on its way to other destinations. To truly break the cycle of cattle rustling and step into a modern future, Turkana must aggressively transition from a pastoralist economy into a value addition and logistics powerhouse. By playing its cards right, Turkana can use its unique geography to orchestrate a flawless trade cycle that benefits every community in the Ateker cluster. The economic domino effect, geopolitical seduction. To fix the stalled Lapset corridor highway at the Nadipol-South Sudan border, Kenya does not need more police boots, it needs economic seduction. The ongoing border skirmishes between the Toposa and the Turkana have frozen construction on the final 11-kilometer stretch. The solution is to give the Toposa a reason to want what is sitting on the Kenyan side of the border. The Toposa region of Kopita is swimming in raw cash from massive alluvial gold mining, but it faces severe, permanent food deficits. By building up Turkana's infrastructure, Kenya creates an irresistible pool of resources. When the Toposa realize that cheap food and medical supplies are sitting just a few hours down a paved highway in Lokichogio and Lodwar, the financial incentive for peace will override the temptation of cross-border raids. The business elites in Kopita will pressure their own militias to clear out the blockades because conflict is bad for their wallets. To trigger this domino effect, Turkana must execute 4 highly actionable, strategic solutions.
1. Build the Lodwar Industrial Abattoir and Free Trade Zone. Turkana must stop exporting raw, live cattle to the south and start processing them locally. The county should establish a certified, heavily secured disease-free zone on the outskirts of Lodwar, anchored by a modern, export-standard abattoir. Using the cheap, reliable electricity of the new Turkwel grid connection, Turkana can purchase livestock from local herders, as well as from the Karamojang and Toposa. By slaughtering, packaging, and cold chain chilling premium beef directly in Lodwar, the county can air freight or truck high-value meat straight to the elite markets of Juba and Nairobi. This turns cattle from a cultural flashpoint for war into a corporate asset. 2. Formalize and gazette the Lokiriama-Moroto Agri-Corridor. The Turkana County government, alongside national policymakers, must aggressively lobby the East African Community, EAC, to formally gazette the Lokiriama border crossing into a fully fledged, legal one-stop border post, OSBP. While cattle will always be Kenya's protected national grain basket, the local reality is that Uganda's rain-fed Moroto region is closer and cheaper for Turkana. Paving the remaining dirt gaps on the Lodwar-Moroto highway will allow cheap Ugandan maize, beans, and fresh produce to pour legally into Turkana. This cheap food will drastically lower the cost of living in Lodwar, while effortlessly feeding the massive, cash-backed humanitarian market of the Kakuma refugee camp, which houses nearly 300,000 consumers. 3. Establish the Tadoniang Inland Fish Port. While Marsabit dominates macro trade with Addis Ababa, Turkana can completely monopolize the niche resource trade via the new Tadoniang OSBP. The Omo Delta is the natural fertile breeding ground for Lake Turkana's massive tilapia and Nile perch populations. By constructing solar-powered cold storage processing hubs at Tadoniang, Turkana can package premium fish and export it directly into the heavily populated, landlocked highlands of southwestern Ethiopia via the Simplified Trade Border Regime, the STBR. Turkana fish becomes Ethiopia's premier protein source. 4. Set up the Lodwar Dry Port for South Sudan consolidation. South Sudan has already been allocated a 10-acre dry port facility within Kenya to ease its transit logistics. Turkana should position Lodwar as the primary inland clearinghouse. Instead of heavy trucks driving all the way from Mombasa to Juba with single commodities, Lodwar should host a major logistics dry port where Ugandan grains, Ethiopian manufactured materials, like cement and textiles, then Kenyan goods are consolidated, broken down, and efficiently packaged before heading up the A1 highway through Nodapa.
The Lotikipi oasis, but generational mirage turned long-term victory. There is a brilliant geographic irony sitting at the absolute northwestern tip of Turkana. Sprawled out right against the South Sudan border, directly adjacent to Toposa territory, lie the vast Lotikipi plains. Historically, this empty savanna was a terrifying, lawless, no-man's land, used as a highway for cross-border cattle raiders. Today, it sits directly on top of the Lotikipi Basin Aquifer, a massive underground reservoir containing billions of cubic meters of water. When discovered, critics quickly labeled Lotikipi a mirage due to hypersalinity at deeper levels. However, recent hydrogeological well logs have completely rewritten the science, proving that the shallower sandstone layers contain highly accessible freshwater pockets. Furthermore, with Turkana now hooked up to the 106 MW Turkwel clean energy grid and a network of solar mini-grids, the energy cost of pumping and treating this water has plummeted. However, a dose of hard-nosed economic reality is required here. Tapping into a deep, subterranean desert aquifer, setting up localized solar purification arrays, and building large-scale industrialized irrigation schemes is a massive, capital-intensive engineering feat it will not materialize in the immediate future. Therefore, Turkana's strategy must be split into a clear timeline. The immediate strategy, 1 to 2 years the Uganda food shield. Turkana cannot wait for the aquifer to save it. Paving the flat Lokiriama-Moroto road and formalizing the border post is a fast, low-hanging fruit. This instantly activates Uganda as Turkana's immediate food source, bringing cheap grain into Lodwar and Kakuma within months. The generational strategy, 10 to 20 years the Lotikipi breadbasket. Once the Uganda trade route stabilizes Turkana's economy and generates county revenue, Turkana can systematically fund the Lotikipi irrigation schemes. By growing food directly on the Lotikipi plains right next to the Taposa, Kenya will physically occupy and pacify the old conflict corridor. Turkana will transition from being a middleman reselling Ugandan grain into a sovereign agricultural powerhouse. The Taposa, flush with gold cash but starved of food, will literally walk across the border line to buy grain straight from the Lotikipi farm gates.
Myth versus reality, why the Taposa can't just bypass Turkana. Critics often argue that the Taposa have plenty of other options for food security, pointing to South Sudan's fertile southwestern green belt or the heavily active Nimule-Uganda trade highway. But a closer look at the geographical map reveals that these alternatives are economic illusions. The Juba pipeline myth, South Sudan can feed its own, the reality, while the Equatoria green belt produces ample food, the transit corridor moving eastward through Juba to Kapita is plagued by rampant militia lawlessness, violent ambushes, and extortionist checkpoints. Domestic transport is too dangerous and expensive. The Nimule highway myth, the Taposa can just rely on the main Uganda-Juba transit route. The reality, to get food via the Nimule border, cargo trucks must drive all the way north to Juba, turn around, and drive over 250 kilometers eastward back to Kapita. This double-back route adds crippling transport delays and middleman costs. The direct Uganda bypass myth, Uganda can trade directly with the Taposa through Kabong, bypassing Kenya entirely. The reality, the direct border between northeastern Uganda and South Sudan is blocked by the rugged Lotuk mountain ranges and the unpaved valleys of Kidipo. During the rainy season, this route is completely washed out. The verdict, Turkana is not an optional luxury for the Taposa. By pairing the Lokiriama-Moroto gateway with the paved A1 highway, Kenya provides the only flat, secure, and logistically sound shortcut to keep eastern South Sudan alive.
Turkana's economic destiny is no longer anchored in the vulnerabilities of the past. The county does not need to burn its own oil to survive. Its towns and upcoming processing factories will run efficiently on the 106 MW Turkwel hydroelectric grid line and localized solar mini-grids. Instead, Turkana can treat its natural oil wealth as a long-term fiscal cushion and an industrial magnet, drawing international energy firms, logistics corporations, and banking hubs directly into Lodwar. The Ateker Link, it is no longer just a romantic vision of cultural unity, it is an inevitable economic blueprint. The era of the wild, forgotten northern frontier is officially over. Armed with a paved international highway, an abundance of clean renewable energy, a tri-border trade network, and the immense financial backing of its black gold, Turkana is no longer a dead-end desert basin. By aggressively transforming itself into the value addition capital of the North Rift, Turkana is proving that the economic incentive to pick up an AK-47 completely disappears when a youth can make guaranteed money trading livestock, fishing legally at Tedonyang, or working in a modern industrial zone. Turkana has the road, it has the power, and it has the oil. The future has officially arrived in the north, and Turkana is ready to lead the entire region across the threshold into a prosperous, modern dawn. The black gold catalyst, fueling the Ateker future. The final, undeniable piece of the Turkana puzzle lies beneath its sandy soil, oil. For over a decade, the massive crude oil discoveries in the South Lokicha Basin, initially led by Tullow Oil, have been treated by critics as a stagnant resource, trapped by global market fluctuations and political debates over pipeline routes to the coast. But viewing Turkana's oil purely through the lens of export barrels misses its true domestic power. The race to develop the South Lokicha fields has done something far more permanent. It forced the initial building blocks of heavy industrial logistics into a historically nomadic wilderness. The oil sector brought the heavy-duty drilling rigs, the specialized heavy transport trucks, the high-capacity airstrips, and the technical engineering expertise that laid the groundwork for Turkana's modern infrastructure. Now, as the wider Lapset transport corridor matures and the county transitions to an era of clean, grid-connected energy surplus, this fossil fuel substrate transforms from a speculative asset into a strategic industrial anchor.